Hello guys and welcome back, it's PugGaming here and this is episode 2 of the Walking Dead series. Now episode 1 was all about the Atlanta skyline and I must firstly thank you guys for your support on that. A lot of positive feedbacks on that design and I hope more will continue. But as promised, episode 2 is the start of Hershel's Farm. So we had to find the location firstly, and like I said in the previous videos, I was trying to find the place on this Atlanta city map which suited the actual real position in real life. Unfortunately the farm itself is a little bit more south than what my map has, so we've plopped it right down in the bottom left hand corner to sort of replicate as close as we possibly can. So stage 1 was pretty much the layout. So using Google Maps and a few pictures that I found online, I worked out the road itself and the sort of tree line around it, and we've placed that in straight away to get some sort of a core down. Now the only difficulty I found was the actual surroundings of this area. The foresty area is extremely large, and to put that many trees in to replicate it is going to be a little bit difficult. So what I'm going to do is just do some sort of a core around it. It's not going to look exact because I don't want to suffer with poor frame rates and sort of leave it to your imagination really. You know what it's trying to replicate, and some of the shots I'll be taking will sort of give you the illusion that there's a forest behind it anyway, which you'll get to see a bit later. So the first foot stages are, once the tree line was in, we've got the roads down now, and it's just to create this first little corner bend to which the Hershel's house, or what it is in real life, the Watley's house, sits itself on. So looking on Google Maps, there's a little bit of a bend around here and another one up the top as well with some trees in between. So we're going to try and keep this to scale as best as we can. Now the actual design itself of the farm is not going to be that complex in terms of a lot of props and assets. I mean, we have the forest around the outside, we have the farm fields, trees around, along with the only sort of major props, which are the actual house. We have the barn, we have the farm wind turbine, or whatever you want to call it, windmill I guess it's called, and the sort of space where the camper van and the camp were set up. So there's not a lot here really that's going to be a focal point, but in my opinion that's going to make things a lot better for the actual design, because the focal points are going to be the ones that you recognise, and that's going to be the house and the barn itself. And I've got a lot of ideas which will commence in episode 3 now, part 2 of this build, for some cool little ideas which will be some very, very exciting cinematics. So keep your eyes open for that. So that will be released the following Sunday. And I did do a little bit of research into this build. I always like to find out a little bit more about what I'm designing to sort of help create some character. And it's interesting actually, the actual farm itself was used, it's actually used for around 4 months by the Walking Dead team. And a very large sum of around $800,000 was paid for that sort of service. And the farm itself is actually a real life sort of working farm, so it's in the middle of nowhere as well, so it sort of suits the actual theme pretty much perfectly for Walking Dead. And yeah, it's a very, very nice sort of location for filming, some great views available. And that's one of the major reasons I chose to do this as one of the Walking Dead projects. One, it's a very sort of well-known scene itself from the series, and I thought it'd be quite a nice contrast. Like I said in the last episode, we've got a lot of different type of builds available here. We've got this farm and sort of woodland one for the farm itself, then we're going to go for sort of Terminus and Alexandria, so 2 very different builds with a lot more as well in the making. So what you're seeing here now in the time lapse is just a quick creation. I did at first try my best to make a proper forest and surround it around, but I realised that the frame rates were dropping tremendously despite my very good computer setup, so I decided to then go with this. So I know it looks a little bit like a golf course, but ignore that factor. These are the sort of sides of the forest, and I've picked the most suitable trees, which do look the best in my opinion for this build and the most closest to what's actually there on the farm itself. And another way that I actually implemented in the end was I actually raised up some of the foresty area on these outskirts, just created a slightly larger sort of bank to build the trees on. And you'll see in the up and coming shot in a moment, you can see that the trees then look a lot more like a sort of foresty area, because it gives a lot more of a better dimension and sort of depth when you're looking at certain angles. So zooming in here, you can see there's a bank of trees behind where the house will be. I haven't done it around all of it yet, but it gives you that perception that there's a more dense sort of forest behind it, and without using a lot of props up and making things go very, very slow. That's a very handy way of doing so. So you can see here, it's just the end of the actual bank itself. I've just raised up, and I'll do a bit more over here now just to show that in a bit more detail. But yeah, you can raise it as high or as low as you want. The best way of doing it is what I found is put all the trees down first and then raise them up after, sort of using different angles to view to make sure that you're getting the perception you want. Now, just adding a few more of the sort of road templates down here. There's a bit on the actual map here, which is like this sort of, I'm not too sure what you can class it as. It's kind of a sort of through sort of road, and it's just created itself from the fact that the farm's been used, and that's been the sort of main point of sort of driving around the front house. So not sure if that's going to stay as a path. It's a bit more, well, a little bit more subtle in real life, so we'll think about that a bit later on. But what I'm going to do now is put down all of the fences around the actual farm itself here, just to sort of build in the sort of conclusion of the actual farmhouse itself. Now this is a view I do love, and I actually managed to find on the workshop one of the closest matches to the actual farm wind turbine, and it pretty much looks identical. Extremely good replication of that, and I'm very pleased with finding that, because it's going to really make this build look a lot more realistic. Now, whilst I place the last few bits of fencing around, we're just going to hop into a very quick time lapse. We'll catch up shortly.
Now take the rest, but babe, I swear that I did my best. Why do you pretend that we both care? The times I did and you weren't there. I've got to run, my heart is bleeding, and I feel back and I really mean it. Was it you, or just someone? What can I do to take a run?
Okay, so now came the difficult part. I could have got someone to create one of the houses itself, but the time consumption involved in doing so would have taken far too long for me. So I looked on the workshop and I found these two houses as the most, well, best suited for the actual house itself. I know it's not going to look perfect, it's not going to look the best, Perhaps in the future, if someone wants to design the actual Hershel Farm house, that'd be amazing. I'll certainly implement this into the build straight away. But I'm going to try and be a little bit clever here. So these two buildings are the best suited in my opinion, but it's kind of a combination of both of them really that we need. So with the move it tool, I'm going to try my best here to try and combine the two together, because it's those two chimneys at the front is what really makes you see, well, makes you feel like it's the actual farmhouse itself. It's those two chimneys you see on all of the images, all of the literature that's issued out for that series. And putting these two together, I must say, it does look pretty good. I know there's going to be a few areas where it's going to look a little bit choppy and there's going to be bits overlapping, etc. But in terms of just to get the front of the house looking realistic, which is what I'm sort of going for here. I know 360 wise it's not going to look the best, but that does not look too bad at all. Up close, as I say, not the best, but on distance, look at that. Not perfect, but I am certainly happy with that. That is the best match that I can possibly find at the moment in time. That works, I like that. By all means guys, if anyone has found a more suitable house in the workshop, I did spend an hour or so looking through as much as I can, but if you've happened to come across one that looks a little bit better suited, let me know and I'll plop that in before episode 3, part 2 of the Hershel Farm is released. So all we got to do now is place the house itself in the correct position, making sure that the front is at the front side, etc, etc. Now another thing I don't like, which I can understand why they are done during the builds, but for example both of these houses have trees attached to them, which I can just about get away with in this build, but ideally I'd rather them without the trees. And I know there's a lot of props out there now where people aren't putting the trees on because people like to do it themselves. But that's my only little complaint that I'm going to be giving today. Everything else on the workshop is absolutely positive and amazing. Once the house was put in, it did look a little bit too, well, this pathway here itself looked a little bit too big. So the perception of having this house in now, I can use what I can see on Google Maps to make this a lot more realistic. So we've just plopped down a pathway here, jump into the Move It mod tool, and now we can place this to make it look a lot more realistic. And that looks pretty damn good to me. So once the roadway itself is done here, the next and probably the last part of this episode is going to be getting the foliage down. So I'm going to do my very best to create the actual placement of all the trees as identical as I possibly can. For a number of factors. One, I do like the sort of randomization that these trees have been planted in. Not sure if it's on purpose, but I do like the fact that it's not all sort of in big groups and big areas. It is very, very unique in the way they are. So what I'm doing here is I'm on the other screen. I've got 2 screens up and running at the moment, and on the second screen I've got Google Maps open, and I'm just looking at what trees are placing where. So I'm going with the small trees to start with, and then moving on to the larger ones, just to do my best to get the placements as realistic as I can. I must say that tree placement is one of the most exciting things that I find in this game. The placing of anything is really exciting in general, but tree placement, you can really make a scenery. You can make a scene really come alive from how you've placed your trees down, and that's what I love. I'm looking at this on Google Maps. If you've got the opportunity to do so, have a search on Google for the Hershel's Farm, and the tree placements are so random and unique. It really does add a lot to the actual design itself, and yeah, it really does take shape very quickly from adding these trees down. From having a big open space looking like a golf course, we're now slowly starting to create something here, and the use of copying those trees is what really is making things excel. Now the original template I did create, there was a few areas that I thought was a little bit over the top in terms of how many trees and the sort of cluster arrangement I did. So you'll see in a moment we zoom up to the top side of the map and there's a sort of a funnel area of trees which, looking back over the Google Maps, you can see actually aren't such a big funnel. It's just a couple of clusters which create a sort of thin line of trees, and I think we'll be popping over that right now. Here we go. So I've deleted this bit. It's in between these fences, and I then just sort of freehand sort of build the clusters I can see off of Google Maps. And sometimes creating trees this way is actually a good sort of way of doing so. The randomization is always key to creating realistic forest and tree areas. If you're going to go a little bit too over the top and just pretty much cover the whole area, you're not going to get that sort of feeling. So you do need to have some breakaway trees, is what I class them as anyway, which are the trees that are just outside the cluster. And realistically there would be some there. You're not always going to have a huge amount of trees in one big bulk. So that's pretty much it for the trees at the moment. I will probably do a bit more tidying up once the project's near completion. But there's one part I want to add, which is right by the actual farm mill, windmill, I don't know what you call it, but we'll call it a windmill. And this little area here is one which is shot a few times in the series, and it's just a little bit of a sort of dirt land just off of the actual wind turbine. And it's just a little location here which is the sort of entrance to this farm area. So it's the bit which is a little bit dirty and muddy from the sort of tractors going back and forth inside here, etc. Sort of moving cattle around, etc. So I wanted to create that, so we're going to use some decors here and sort of create a little area here for us. So I didn't want to go too over the top of this. It took me a little while to work out what sort of foundation to create here, and what I tend to like to do now is create a foundation with the actual the hand painting tools like this, and then put some decor over the top. It seems to work the best, and you don't go too over the top with the actual placement of decors as well, so that definitely works extremely well. Now the one thing I love about these time lapses is it gets to show you guys that I don't place things down perfectly first time. There's a lot of trial and error in these project builds, and as you'll see in the up and coming few seconds, I add down far too many decors at first, and I end up deleting pretty much all of them and sticking to something a lot more basic. And you'll find that sometimes that little is actually more in terms of placement of some of these props. And the downside to some of the decors is when you overlap them, you do get a bit of a funny sort of shake when you're moving the camera around, and obviously we want to avoid that to the best of our ability. But the design I went for in the end, as I said, was a lot more simple, and we just went with these dirts here, these dirt decors, and as you see I end up deleting everything else that I've already placed down, including part of the fence, which was a little bit silly of me, but anyway, we complete that after. So this, in my eyes, looks a lot better. And the good thing is, because we're using the grass feature as well, putting the dirt down has a nice break up between that and the bits of grass that are sticking upwards. So that itself works really well, and I'm going to sort of implement that around the farm itself as well, probably in part 2, episode 3 of this current series. So the very last part of this first episode is just placing down, what I wanted to do as well, I wanted to place down the actual RV, which is parked over in the corner. I was trying to find the best coloured one in the end, and I do like the red one as the best suited. So we popped it down right over here. I did cut out some of the moving of the trees, so I did have to move that cluster of trees around because I placed it a little bit too high for where the actual placement of the RV is. So that's the little area, as you remember from the series, where they had their camp. So opened up the fence a little bit here, moved some of the trees around, and done the same decored detail as I did over on the other side by the wind turbine. So that, guys, is the end of episode 2, part 1 of Hershel's Farm. So as I finish off these last little bits of decor, we're going to jump into a sort of brief overview of what we've done today, cinematic style. And in the meantime, guys, thank you very much for watching. There is a huge surprise in the next episode when we come to finishing off the rest of this farm. And yes, it is the barn, which I'm very excited to show off. So we'll talk about that more next week. But until then, enjoy these final shots. Leave me a message. Let me know your thoughts on the design so far. And if you haven't already, drop me a sub. Hit that like button. And until next time, guys, all the best.